I'm writing this here because I need to get it out of my head, and because I know at least some of you will understand what I mean without me having to explain every single detail. If you've never served, this might sound exaggerated or dramatic. If you have, you'll probably recognize the feeling before you even finish the first paragraph. I was traveling on vacation. Or at least, that's what the ticket said. In reality, it was one of those in-between states where your body is allowed to move forward, but your mind is still stuck somewhere behind you, replaying things you didn't ask to remember. I wasn't going anywhere special, just getting away from a place that had started to feel too small and too loud at the same time. I was in civilian clothes. That part mattered more than I expected it to. Jeans that didn't fit quite right anymore, sneakers with worn soles, a dark jacket with no markings, no structure, nothing that suggested authority or experience. I chose it on purpose. I stood in front of the mirror that morning and made sure there was nothing about me that stood out. No posture corrections, no sharp movements, no signs. After service, you learn very quickly that being recognizable is a risk. Not always a physical one. Sometimes it's social. People see the uniform and suddenly decide who you are for you. A hero, a threat, a problem, a symbol, something they can argue with, something they can test. I didn't want to be any of that. I wanted to be invisible, to be no one. Just another passenger with a backpack and tired eyes. That's the strange thing no one really talks about. After you come back, anonymity becomes a luxury. You miss being unremarkable. You miss being someone no one feels entitled to comment on. A vacation for me isn't beaches or cocktails or photos. It's the hope that maybe, for a few hours, I won't be carrying the weight of being useful. Because when you've spent a long time being necessary, your brain doesn't know what to do when you're suddenly optional. The bus was already half full when I got on. Old, but clean. That specific smell of plastic seats warmed by bodies, diesel, and cheap coffee from thermoses. The kind of bus where people talk louder than they need to, as if the engine might steal their words if they don't defend them. I paid, nodded at the driver, and avoided eye contact like it was a skill I'd recently learned. My instincts wanted me to scan the aisle, count exits, note who was sitting where. I caught myself doing it anyway. You don't unlearn that overnight. I chose a seat closer to the middle, not too close to the driver, not near the back. My back pressed against the seat automatically, searching for something solid. My backpack went between my legs without me thinking about it. Habit. Always habit. I remember thinking, okay, this is fine, this is normal. I told myself that a few times. At that moment, I still believed this would be a quiet ride. No conversations, no attention, no reminders. Just distance between me and everything I didn't want to think about yet. No one knew who I was. No one knew what I'd done. No one knew what I'd seen. And that anonymity felt like safety. I didn't know yet that it wouldn't last. I didn't know yet that one casual sentence, said without anger or effort, would turn a simple bus ride into a moment I'd replay over and over afterward. At that point, I was still just a girl in civilian clothes, sitting very still, hoping the road would do what roads are supposed to do, take you away from things. This is usually the part where people expect something vague, something safe, something like, I served my country, or I believed in an idea. That's what sounds good on posters and in speeches. The truth is less poetic and much heavier. I didn't serve something abstract. I didn't wake up every day thinking about flags or slogans or history books. I served very specific things. Concrete things. Things you can point at. Borders you can draw on a map. Streets where lights still turn on in the evenings. Houses where people argue about stupid, ordinary problems because they're allowed to. I stood for people who sleep peacefully and think that's normal. People who complain about traffic, about prices, about politicians on TV, without ever stopping to think why they're allowed to complain out loud. I stood for the right to sit on a bus, scroll your phone, eat a burger, and feel annoyed instead of afraid. I stood for people who will never ask what it costs. That's not an accusation. It's not bitterness. It's just a fact that settles into your bones after a while. You realize that the better you do your job, the less visible you become. The more normal life feels for others, the more distant your own experience becomes from theirs. During service, you don't think about how this will separate you later. You're too busy staying functional, staying focused, staying alive. You learn to measure days by tasks, not feelings. You learn to shut things down internally because feelings get in the way of decisions, and decisions get people home. Or don't. When I came back, people asked me questions they thought were respectful. Was it hard? Are you proud? Would you do it again? I learned to answer automatically. Short sentences, neutral tone, no details. Because details make people uncomfortable. They want the version of you that fits into their understanding of the world, not the version that challenges it. What they don't tell you is that after service, you don't really come back to the same social rules. You're still expected to smile, to be polite, to tolerate ignorance. But you carry knowledge that changes how words sound. Certain phrases start to feel loud, careless, heavy in a way the speaker doesn't notice. When someone says, "It's not that serious," you remember times when it absolutely was. When someone says, "It'll probably be fine," you think about how often it wasn't. You learn to stay quiet, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you understand consequences too well. That's what made that bus ride strange even before anything happened. I was surrounded by people living inside the peace I helped protect, and none of them knew it. None of them needed to know it. That was the point. I didn't need gratitude. I didn't need recognition. I didn't even need respect. I just needed space. Space to exist without being tested, without being challenged by someone who had never stood where I stood, never made the choices I made, never paid the price of being useful. I sat there, watching reflections in the window, thinking about how odd it is to defend a world that will later question your right to belong in it. And that's the cruel irony no one prepares you for. You don't come back expecting applause. You come back expecting neutrality. What you don't expect is judgment. At that moment, on that bus, I still believed neutrality was possible. I believed I could just sit there, mind my business, let the road carry me forward, and leave my past where it belonged. I didn't know yet that someone nearby felt entitled to an opinion about where people like me should have stayed. I didn't know yet that my silence was about to be interpreted as weakness. And I definitely didn't know that the calm I'd learned to survive would soon be mistaken for submission. The bus was already waiting when I reached the platform. Engine running, doors open, the driver leaning slightly forward like the vehicle itself was tired of standing still. It wasn't a modern bus. No sleek screens, no polished seats. Just something practical that had clearly been repaired more times than anyone cared to count. That kind of bus always feels honest to me. Nothing hidden. Nothing pretending to be better than it is. I stepped up, handed over my ticket, and gave the driver a brief nod. He barely looked at me, just tore the stub and gestured inside. That was fine. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to pass through the moment the same way I'd passed through dozens of checkpoints before, quietly, efficiently, without leaving an impression. Inside, the air was warm and stale. Plastic seats, fabric worn thin in places, faint scratches on the windows where someone had once tried to clean graffiti and failed. The smell hit immediately. Diesel, old upholstery, cheap coffee from thermoses people clutched like lifelines. It reminded me of long transfers, early mornings, waiting without knowing exactly how long you'd be waiting. A small TV was mounted near the driver, angled toward the front rows. The news was on, but the sound was muted. Just images and a scrolling ticker. Familiar terrain flashed by for half a second before changing to something else. I noticed my eyes lock onto it automatically. I hated that reflex. I paused in the aisle for a moment, letting other passengers settle before choosing a seat. That pause wasn't hesitation. It was assessment. Even now, even in civilian clothes, my body still wanted to understand the space, where the exits were, who sat where, who avoided eye contact and who stared too long. I caught myself and exhaled slowly. You're allowed to be normal, I reminded myself. You're not on duty. I moved toward the middle of the bus, not near the front, where conversations tend to happen, not in the back, where people feel anonymous enough to say whatever they want. Somewhere neutral, somewhere forgettable. When I sat down, my body adjusted before my mind did. Back pressed firmly against the seat, feet planted, backpack pulled forward and secured between my legs, hands resting where I could see them. It was automatic, ingrained deeper than habits like checking your phone or crossing your arms. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. Civilian, tired, ordinary. If you didn't know me, there was nothing there that suggested I had ever been anything else. And that was the strange part. After everything, I looked like someone who had never left. People started boarding behind me. The bus filled with small noises, bags hitting the floor, seats squeaking, someone coughing, someone else laughing too loudly, a child whining, a phone ringing, life happening in fragments. I focused on breathing evenly, letting the motion of the bus rock me just enough to be distracting. The driver closed the doors with a dull hiss. The engine revved slightly, then settled into a steady vibration that traveled through the floor and into my legs. As we pulled away from the platform, I felt that familiar sensation. Movement without control. You're going somewhere, but you're not the one deciding how fast or by which route. Normally, that would make me uneasy. This time, I welcomed it. I told myself again that this was just a ride, just people, just distance. At that moment, nothing had happened yet. No words spoken, no tension, no reason to be alert. But even then, a part of me already knew something was off. Maybe it was the way voices carried. Maybe it was the way the news kept flashing silently on the screen. Or maybe it was just experience, quietly reminding me that silence doesn't mean safety. I sat there, surrounded by strangers, wearing clothes that erased my past, and hoped, naively, that anonymity would be enough. Once the bus was fully on the road, I allowed myself to do what I'd been trying not to do since boarding. I looked at the people around me, not openly, not obviously. Just quick, quiet observations, the kind that slip in before you can stop them. I didn't do it out of curiosity. That's what people always assume. It wasn't curiosity, it was conditioning. When you spend long enough depending on awareness, your eyes stop asking permission. Across the aisle sat an elderly woman with a large shopping bag clutched to her chest like it contained something fragile. Maybe it did. Her shoulders were tight, raised slightly, as if she expected the bus to jerk violently at any second. Every time it slowed down, her fingers tightened around the handles. She kept glancing toward the front, lips pressed together, counting stops in her head. She reminded me of people who've lived through too many unstable periods and never fully relax afterward, even when things are supposedly calm. 2 rows ahead of her was a man in a suit. Not an expensive one, but clean and well-fitted. He sat with his legs spread just enough to claim space, phone in one hand, voice loud and confident as he spoke to someone on the other end. He laughed easily, the kind of laugh that assumes agreement. He gestured as he talked, like the world around him was a stage designed for his opinions. I could already tell he was used to speaking without consequences. Behind him, a young couple shared a seat. The man scrolled endlessly on his phone, thumb moving with mechanical precision. He didn't look up once. The woman sat by the window, forehead resting lightly against the glass. Her eyes followed the passing scenery, but she didn't really seem to be seeing it. She had that distant look of someone waiting for something to change, without knowing what that something is. They didn't touch, not even accidentally. A few seats behind me, someone was listening to music without headphones, volume low but noticeable. A tinny beat leaked into the space, mixing with the engine's hum. No one said anything. Everyone tolerated it in silence, the unspoken agreement of public transport. I'll endure your inconvenience if you endure mine. I noticed how relaxed most of them were. Slouched postures, unprotected necks, bags casually placed on the floor or overhead, people asleep with mouths slightly open, people arguing quietly over nothing important. It struck me again how different things feel after you come back. Not worse, just louder, brighter, careless in a way that's almost shocking when you first notice it. People trust the environment to behave. They trust the road, the bus, the strangers around them. I envied that. At the same time, a strange, familiar protectiveness settled in my chest. Not active, not conscious, just there, like an old reflex that never quite fades. I wasn't on duty. I knew that, but my body didn't fully believe it. I found myself cataloging emotions instead of threats. Who looked anxious? Who looked bored? Who looked entitled? Who looked fragile? No one noticed me doing this. That was the irony. I could see them clearly, but to them, I was invisible. Just another tired girl in civilian clothes, staring vaguely out a window. And that invisibility felt both comforting and dangerous. Because when people don't see you as anything specific, they sometimes feel free to project whatever they want onto you. They speak more openly. They test boundaries they wouldn't test if they knew who they were talking to. At that point, I still didn't know who would be the one to do it. I just knew, deep down, that someone eventually would. The bus rolled forward steadily, carrying us all together in the same direction, even though our worlds barely touched. Different lives, different understandings, different ideas of what it means to be safe. I sat there quietly, watching them one by one, and thought about how strange it is to protect people who don't know you're doing it, and how easily some of them forget that protection has a cost. A few rows ahead of me sat a boy. He couldn't have been older than 8, maybe 9 at most. Round cheeks, soft arms, that slightly awkward posture kids have when they're still growing into their bodies. He held a burger with both hands like it was something precious, biting into it with complete focus. Sauce dripped down onto his jacket, dark stains spreading without him noticing or caring. He was happy, fully, openly happy. Every bite was followed by a satisfied chew, his feet swinging just a little above the floor. He hummed to himself between bites, not even quietly. No one told him to stop. His parents sat on either side of him, or at least, they were physically there. Mentally, they were somewhere else entirely. Both stared at their phones, thumbs moving in short, aggressive motions. Scrolling, typing, reacting to something happening far away instead of what was right in front of them. The boy dropped a piece of lettuce onto the floor. No one noticed. He wiped his hands on his jacket. No reaction. He leaned sideways, almost bumping into his father. Still nothing. I watched this longer than I probably should have. Not because I was judging them. I didn't feel anger or superiority. Just a quiet, complicated sadness mixed with something softer. Recognition, maybe. Or acceptance. This is how it's supposed to be, I thought. Children shouldn't be monitored like threats. Parents shouldn't be tense. A kid should be able to eat a messy burger on a bus without anyone worrying about anything more serious than stains. I thought about all the places where that isn't possible. All the places where children learn early how to stay still, how to stay quiet, how to watch adults for cues before they relax. This boy didn't know any of that. And that was the point. I wondered who he would grow up to be, what he would complain about one day. Probably something trivial. Probably something that would make someone like me roll my eyes and stay silent. And that was fine. More than fine. I didn't serve so people would understand. I served so they wouldn't have to. The boy laughed suddenly at something on the screen his mother was holding. He leaned over, pointing with greasy fingers. She smiled briefly, distracted, then went back to scrolling. That was enough for him. He returned to his burger, content. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not regret, not resentment. Something closer to responsibility. The kind that doesn't go away just because you've technically finished your job. I realized then how strange it must look from the outside. A tired girl in a dark jacket watching a child eat lunch like it was the most important thing in the world. No one would guess what was going through my head. No one would imagine the distance between our experiences. And maybe that's for the best. Because the moment people start guessing, they start speaking. And the moment they start speaking, they feel entitled to judge. The bus hit a small bump in the road. The boy bounced slightly in his seat and laughed, delighted by the motion. The elderly woman nearby tightened her grip on her bag again. The man in the suit kept talking, his voice rising as he emphasized a point to whoever was on the other end of the line. Life continued in layers, all of us sharing the same narrow space while living in completely different realities. I looked at the boy one last time before turning back to the window. I hoped, sincerely, that he would never need to know why his world was as calm as it felt. That he would grow up arguing about nonsense, complaining loudly, eating burgers without fear. That's how it's supposed to be. And sitting there, anonymous and silent, I understood something very clearly. If protecting that kind of ignorance means enduring moments of disrespect, misunderstanding, or even humiliation later, then that too is part of the service, even after the uniform is gone. I don't think people understand how difficult it is to come back and simply exist among others. Not in a dramatic way, not with panic attacks or obvious breakdowns. Just quietly difficult. Like wearing shoes that almost fit, but rub your skin raw if you walk in them long enough. Being among people after service feels unnatural at first. Everything is too loud, too loose. Conversations spill everywhere without direction or caution. People interrupt each other, joke about things they don't understand, say words like never and always, as if they've actually tested those limits. I sat there on the bus, surrounded by ordinary life, and felt like I was listening to a foreign language I technically spoke, but no longer felt fluent in. No one was doing anything wrong. That's the worst part. There was no villain in this moment. Just people living the way they're allowed to live. Laughing when something is funny. Complaining when something is inconvenient. Trusting the environment to stay predictable. I used to do that too. After service, you notice how rarely people look around. How rarely they think about exits or reactions or what happens next. Someone stands up suddenly and half the bus barely flinches. A loud noise comes from outside and no one even turns their head. I noticed everything. My shoulders stayed tense even when I told them not to be. My breathing stayed measured. Every laugh around me landed a second late in my ears, as if my body needed time to approve it. I hated that about myself. I hated that I couldn't just relax like everyone else. At the same time, I envied them. I envied the woman scrolling through photos without checking who was behind her. I envied the man talking loudly on his phone without worrying who might overhear. I envied the parents who could afford to ignore their surroundings because they trusted the world to behave. That trust is a privilege you don't realize you have until it's gone. There was a moment when the bus slowed suddenly, brakes hissing sharply. Several passengers swayed forward. Someone cursed quietly. Someone laughed it off. I didn't move. My body reacted before my mind did, stabilizing, adjusting, ready for whatever came next. Nothing came. The bus continued on. No danger, no threat, just a pothole. And yet my heart didn't slow down immediately. It took a few seconds longer than it should have. I stared at my hands and forced them to relax, fingers uncurling one by one like I was giving myself permission to exist in this space without armor. That's another thing people don't talk about. After service, you don't stop protecting others. You just do it silently, automatically, without recognition and without instruction, even when you're not supposed to. I caught myself watching reflections in the windows again. Not faces directly, reflections. That way, you can see without being seen. I knew who was tense, who was bored, who was careless, who might react badly if challenged, and I hated that I knew. Because knowing creates responsibility, and responsibility is heavy when you're trying to be off. I remember thinking, you're not here to guard anyone. But the thought felt dishonest. The truth is, even sitting there in civilian clothes, anonymous, exhausted, I still felt responsible for the space around me, for the fragile normality everyone else took for granted, for the fact that this bus was just a bus and not something worse. That responsibility doesn't turn off when the uniform comes off. It just loses its name. People think service ends when you leave. In reality, it just changes shape. It becomes quieter, more internal, more isolating. I looked around again and realized something uncomfortable. If anything happened, people wouldn't look to me for help. They wouldn't see me as capable or relevant. I looked too ordinary, too young, too neutral. And that should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt like erasure. I sat there, surrounded by voices, movements, life happening casually all around me, and understood why so many of us struggle to reintegrate. It's not because we want attention. It's because we have to learn how to be unnecessary again, how to exist in a world that doesn't need you, and still feel like you belong. I stared out the window and focused on the road, letting the rhythm of the bus steady me. I told myself to stay calm, to stay quiet, to let people be people. I didn't know yet that my silence was about to be challenged. The TV near the driver kept playing the news. No sound, just images, captions, and that relentless ticker sliding from right to left like it had somewhere important to be. At first, I tried not to look at it. I told myself it was irrelevant, that I didn't need reminders, that I'd earned the right to look away. My eyes ignored me. They kept drifting forward, catching fragments in the reflection of the window, then turning fully toward the screen as if pulled by a magnet. Familiar landscapes appeared for a second or two, roads I recognized, buildings I didn't need labels for. Then they disappeared, replaced by something else. Another headline, another situation. No faces, no voices. Just the clean, distant version of reality people consume between stops. That's how it always is. When there's no sound, it looks simple, manageable, almost abstract, like something happening somewhere far away to people you'll never meet. I wondered how many of the passengers noticed what was on that screen. The elderly woman glanced up once, frowned slightly, then looked away as if she'd touched something hot. The man in the suit didn't look at all. His voice stayed loud, confident, detached from anything happening outside his call. The young couple didn't react. The woman by the window stared past the screen, through it, into something private. The boy with the burger didn't even glance up. That felt right. He shouldn't have to. Someone scoffed softly a few rows back, a sound of irritation, not fear. Someone else sighed dramatically. A third person shifted in their seat like the news had personally inconvenienced them. I watched all of this without moving. There's a specific kind of anger that doesn't feel hot. It feels cold and heavy, like a weight settling into your stomach. Not because people don't care, but because they don't have to. I didn't want them to care. That's the truth people don't expect. I didn't want attention or sympathy or applause. I wanted exactly what I was seeing. Indifference, normalcy, the luxury of being annoyed instead of threatened. Still, it stung. Because when you've been close enough to recognize details the screen deliberately blurs out, It's hard to watch people reduce it to background noise. Hard to see something that once defined your entire existence turned into silent visuals while someone complains about legroom. The bus swayed slightly as we took a curve. The TV flickered for a second, then stabilized. The ticker kept moving, relentless, emotionless. I felt myself dissociate just a little, not fully, just enough to step back inside my head. That familiar internal space where things are ordered, quiet, controlled, where you observe instead of react. I remembered briefings where screens like that meant very different things, where silence didn't mean safety, but preparation, where images weren't meant to inform, but to orient you before something changed. Here, they were just content. I noticed my jaw tighten and forced it to relax. I wasn't angry at the people around me. I wasn't angry at the news. I wasn't even angry at the situation itself. I was angry at the distance, at how easy it is to forget when forgetting is allowed. Another headline slid by. Another familiar word stripped of context and consequence. Someone behind me muttered, "Same thing again," and went back to their phone. I thought about how many times I'd heard that phrase before service, how casually I'd said it myself, back when repetition meant boredom, not endurance. The TV showed a wide shot of a place I knew too well. From far away, it looked calm, almost peaceful. I knew better. I looked away then, finally, focused on the window, on my reflection layered over passing trees and buildings, civilian clothes, neutral face, no indication of the noise happening behind my eyes. That's another quiet humiliation no one prepares you for. Carrying memories that have no place to land, no space in conversation, no acceptable moment to surface. So you swallow them. You let the news play without sound. You let people scoff and sigh. You let silence do its work. I sat there, breathing steadily, reminding myself that this was exactly what I had stood for. The right for news to be optional. The right for danger to be distant. The right for people to be bored instead of afraid. Even if it meant sitting quietly while parts of my life scrolled past like subtitles no one bothered to read. The bus kept moving. The TV kept playing. And somewhere between one silent headline and the next, I realized that my anonymity was about to be tested, not by the news, but by the person sitting right next to me. He spoke like it was nothing. That's the part that stayed with me the most afterward. Not the words themselves, but how easily they came out of him. No anger, no hesitation, just confidence. The kind of confidence people have when they've never had to measure their speech against consequences. He leaned slightly toward me, invading that invisible personal space people usually respect on public transport. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive, trying too hard to be noticed. He glanced at the muted TV, then at me, then back again, as if connecting dots that didn't actually exist. "Why are you even going there?" he said. A pause. "You should have stayed home." His tone was almost conversational, like he was giving advice, like this was a reasonable thing to say to a stranger whose life he knew absolutely nothing about. For a second, my brain went completely still. That happens sometimes. Not panic, not shock. More like everything lining up too neatly. Every sound sharpened. The hum of the engine. The faint rattle of loose plastic. Someone coughing 3 rows back. The squeak of a seat as the bus adjusted to the road. I didn't look at him right away. That was deliberate. In service, you learn that reactions are information. The first reaction is the one people expect, the one they're prepared for. Silence, on the other hand, makes people uncomfortable. It creates space, and in that space, they reveal themselves. He took my lack of response as permission. "I mean, seriously," he continued, lowering his voice slightly, like we were sharing a private truth. "What's the point? All this trouble, all this drama. People like you just make things worse. People like you." There it was. A neat little box he'd decided to put me in without even knowing my name. I was just a girl in civilian clothes to him. Someone safe to lecture. Someone he assumed would either nod politely or get emotional and defensive. I felt the familiar urge to scan him properly. Weight distribution, tension in his shoulders, hands, breathing. I pushed it down. This wasn't that kind of situation. Not yet. Instead, I focused on staying calm. Calm isn't passive. That's something people misunderstand. Calm is controlled. Calm is intentional. Calm is choosing not to escalate when you easily could. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him. Up close, he wasn't impressive. Early 40s maybe. Well-fed. Well-rested. The kind of man who mistakes comfort for competence. His eyes flicked briefly away when they met mine, then returned, as if daring me to contradict him. "Stayed home?" I repeated quietly. He nodded, encouraged by the fact that I'd finally engaged. "Exactly. Stayed home. Let someone else deal with it." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I could feel the bus listening. That sounds dramatic, but anyone who's been in a confined public space during tension knows what I mean. Conversations nearby softened. The man's phone call ended abruptly. Even the boy with the burger had gone quiet, though I'm not sure why. Still, no one intervened. No one ever does at this stage. People wait to see who will break first. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tense my jaw. I didn't insult him back. I didn't need to. I turned fully toward him and said evenly, "Because if we had stayed home, you wouldn't be silent right now, out of politeness." He frowned slightly. I let the pause stretch just long enough to land. "You'd be silent out of fear." The effect was immediate. His mouth opened, then closed. His confident posture collapsed inward just a little. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. He looked around, suddenly aware of the other passengers, of the attention he hadn't realized he'd attracted. No one laughed. No one clapped. No one rushed to support either of us. But something shifted. The air felt heavier, thicker, like a door had quietly closed. He turned away without another word, staring rigidly ahead like the conversation had never happened. His jaw tightened. His foot bounced once, then stilled. I faced forward again, heart steady, hands relaxed in my lap. That was it. No shouting, no confrontation scene worthy of a movie. Just one sentence placed carefully where it belonged. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. Humiliation doesn't always come from being attacked. Sometimes it comes from being underestimated and choosing not to play the role you're assigned. The bus continued moving, but no one spoke anymore. Silence on a bus isn't natural. It doesn't happen the way quiet happens in a library or late at night. It's heavier than that, more deliberate. Like everyone collectively decides to stop making noise at the same time, without ever agreeing to it out loud. That's what happened after I spoke. The engine kept humming, steady and indifferent. The wheels kept chewing through asphalt. The bus didn't slow down, didn't change lanes, didn't react in any visible way. But inside, something had shifted. Conversations that had been floating lazily through the air just stopped. Not one by one. All at once. The man in the suit across the aisle ended his phone call mid-sentence. I heard him mutter a rushed goodbye before shoving the phone into his pocket. He stared straight ahead, shoulders stiff, suddenly very aware of the space he occupied. The elderly woman loosened her grip on the shopping bag. I noticed it because her hands trembled slightly before settling. She didn't look at me directly, but her posture changed. Less defensive, less braced. Someone behind me cleared their throat. Too loudly. The kind of sound people make when they don't know what else to do with their discomfort. The boy with the burger froze for a second, sauce still on his fingers. He glanced between the adults, confused, then went back to eating, slower this time. His parents finally looked up from their phones, exchanging a quick glance before pretending nothing had happened. No one said anything. And that's the part people don't talk about when they imagine standing up for yourself. They picture applause, validation, someone saying, "She's right." Real life doesn't work like that. Most of the time, people don't want truth. They want quiet restored. I felt eyes on me without anyone actually turning their head. Peripheral attention, the safest kind. The kind that lets people say later, "I didn't really see anything." The man next to me, the one who'd spoken, sat rigidly now. Arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. He didn't look at me again. Not once. Not even accidentally. His confidence had drained out of him like air from a punctured tire, leaving behind irritation and something else underneath it. Fear, maybe. Not of me specifically. Of the realization that the person he'd decided to talk down to wasn't who he thought she was. I didn't feel triumphant. That surprised me. There was no rush, no satisfaction, just a steady, familiar calm. The same calm I'd felt in moments when clarity mattered more than emotion. When you say exactly what needs to be said, and nothing more. My hands didn't shake, my breathing stayed even, my heart rate didn't spike. It felt finished. That's another thing service teaches you. When something is done properly, there's no need to dwell on it. Still, the silence pressed in. People hate unresolved tension. They want someone to laugh it off, to change the subject, to restore the illusion that everything is fine. But no one volunteered. No one wanted to be the next person to speak and risk saying the wrong thing. So the bus listened. I stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, letting my reflection blur into the window. Civilian clothes, neutral face, nothing that explained why one sentence had been enough to shut everyone up. And that anonymity, once again, worked in my favor, because now they were filling the gaps themselves, wondering, recalculating, rewriting the version of me they'd created in their heads just minutes earlier. I imagined the questions forming silently. Who is she? What does she know? What has she seen? No one asked. The man next to me shifted in his seat once, then stilled. He looked smaller now. Not physically, socially. Like someone who'd misjudged a situation and realized too late that there was no graceful exit. The bus rolled on. Gradually, the silence softened. Not fully broken, just stretched thinner. Someone coughed again, more naturally this time. A phone vibrated. The TV kept playing its muted news, headlines sliding past as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Life resumed. That's how it always goes. Moments like this don't explode. They ripple, then disappear beneath routine. By the time people get off the bus, they'll remember the delay, the seat, the weather. But not the reason they went quiet all at once. Except for him. And except for me. Because for him, that silence was a mirror. And for me, it was confirmation. Confirmation that strength doesn't need volume, that humiliation doesn't always come from being insulted. Sometimes it comes from realizing you spoke where you had no ground to stand on. I sat there until the tension fully dissolved, until the bus felt like just a bus again. And when it did, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. After the silence loosened its grip, the bus returned to pretending it was just a bus. That's how these things end most of the time. Not with resolution, but with continuation. The road didn't care about what had just happened. The asphalt stretched forward, indifferent, carrying us all in the same direction whether we liked it or not. The driver adjusted his mirror. The engine changed pitch slightly as we picked up speed. Outside, fields and low buildings slid past the windows, stitched together by gray winter light. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Life resumed its rhythm. The boy finished his burger. I noticed because he licked the sauce from his fingers carefully, one by one, then wiped his hands on a napkin his mother finally handed him without looking up from her phone. He leaned back, satisfied, legs swinging again, the tension he'd briefly absorbed already gone. Good, I thought. Let him forget. The elderly woman shifted in her seat and rested her bag on the floor this time instead of clutching it. Her shoulders dropped just a fraction. Relief, maybe, or just fatigue. Either way, her body no longer braced for impact. The man in the suit started another call, quieter now. His tone had changed, less theatrical, more contained. He avoided looking in my direction entirely. The man next to me stayed silent. He stared straight ahead like the road was the only acceptable thing left to focus on. His earlier certainty was gone, replaced by rigid neutrality. I didn't look at him again. I didn't need to. The moment had already passed, and dragging it out would have been unnecessary cruelty. That's another misconception people have about strength. They think it needs to dominate. It doesn't. It just needs to be precise. I turned my attention back to the window. Reflections layered over the landscape. My face over bare trees. My eyes over passing signs. Civilian. Anonymous. Ordinary again. Exactly what I'd wanted at the beginning of the trip. And yet, something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically, not painfully, just enough to notice. I realized that this quiet correction, this moment of clarity, was also part of coming back. Not just enduring humiliation or misunderstanding, but choosing when and how to respond. Choosing not to shrink, but also not to explode. The road stretched on, straight and dull. I thought about all the people who would get off this bus and never think about this ride again. About how easily moments dissolve into routine. How quickly tension fades when nothing forces it to stay. I thought about how many times I'd carried silence with me instead of speaking. How often I'd let comments slide because explaining felt exhausting. How often I'd accepted being underestimated because it seemed easier. Today, I hadn't. Not out of anger, not out of pride, just out of honesty. And that felt grounding. The TV near the driver kept playing the news without sound. Headlines came and went. The world kept happening somewhere else, to someone else. For the first time since boarding, I didn't feel the need to watch it. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a moment. The bus rocked gently, the motion steady enough to be almost soothing. I focused on breathing, on the simple fact that I was here, alive, moving forward. No uniform, no rank, no expectations, just me. I understood then that part of my job, even now, even after service, was to protect this kind of normality. Not just for others, but for myself. To allow life to continue without constantly proving why I deserved space in it. The road went on. And for the first time in a while, I let myself believe that I could go on with it. Not invisible, not erased, but simply present. There was one chapter left to this experience, not on the road, but inside me. And I was finally ready to face it. I got off the bus a few stops later. Nothing dramatic marked the moment. No one followed me. No one stared. The doors opened with the same tired hiss. The cold air rushed in, and people stood up in the usual clumsy rhythm, gathering bags, checking pockets, already shifting their attention to whatever came next. I stepped down onto the pavement and felt the ground under my feet. Solid, indifferent, real. The bus pulled away almost immediately. That, too, felt symbolic. How quickly spaces reset once you leave them. How fast you become a memory no one bothers to keep. By the time the bus disappeared around the corner, whatever tension had existed inside it was already gone, replaced by new conversations, new annoyances, new stories that had nothing to do with me. And I was okay with that. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, backpack still on my shoulders, hands tucked into my jacket pockets. My reflection stared back at me from a dark shop window. Still civilian, still ordinary, still unreadable. But I wasn't the same as when I boarded. That ride forced something into focus for me, not the man's words. Those were forgettable. People say careless things all the time. What stayed with me was my reaction. The fact that I didn't freeze, that I didn't apologize, that I didn't feel the need to explain myself or justify my existence. I used to think strength after service meant endurance, keeping your head down, letting ignorance slide because correcting it felt like wasted energy. I told myself that silence was maturity. Sometimes it is, but sometimes silence is just another way of disappearing. What I learned on that bus is that choosing to speak doesn't mean choosing conflict. It means choosing accuracy, choosing boundaries, choosing not to accept a version of yourself someone else invented because it's more comfortable for them. The humiliation wasn't the sentence he said to me. The humiliation would have been swallowing it. Instead, I left it where it belonged, with him. That matters, especially after service, when people feel entitled to decide where you should be, how you should behave, and how quiet you should stay. They don't see the discipline it takes to remain calm. They mistake restraint for weakness and composure for permission. I won't carry that mistake for them anymore. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't escalate. I didn't expose my past or list my credentials or demand respect. I didn't need to. The point was never to impress anyone. The point was to remain intact. After everything I'd given, I was allowed that much. So here's what I'd tell anyone reading this who's been through something similar. Whether you served or not, you don't owe strangers explanations. You don't owe comfort to people who speak carelessly. You don't owe silence when silence erases you. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. Sometimes it's just one sentence, said calmly, at exactly the right moment, and then walking away without looking back. I'm still learning how to exist outside the uniform, still learning how to be just a person again without feeling like I've lost my purpose. That road is longer than any bus route. But that day showed me something important. I can move forward without shrinking. I can correct without cruelty. I can belong to the world I helped protect, not as a symbol, not as a reminder, but as myself. And if someone ever tells me again that I should have stayed home, I know now that I don't need to argue. I already went where I needed to go, and I came back.